Hello everybody, welcome back to Scare Files. My name is Chase. Today we're covering Tier 5 of the disturbing Reddit posts Iceberg. If you enjoy this video and like this style of content, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, doing all of that. It really helps me out a lot with the algorithm as a small channel. And I forgot to mention it last video, but I did not make this iceberg. I found it on Reddit, but the user has since deleted his account, so shout out to them. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get right into it. Missing coworker. This entry refers to a post made on the Reddit Bureau of Investigation subreddit around 2020. On Wednesday, July 22nd, a coworker of mine abruptly up and left work before the end of his shift and hasn't been seen since. 1 week later, a text message is received from him containing only these 3 photos. Does anybody recognize the locations shown in these photos? I work at a lab that makes prescription eyeglasses in northern Ohio. Last week on Wednesday, about 6 hours into our 10-hour shift, around 7:10 p.m., a coworker of mine got up from his station in a hurry, left his bag with personal belongings at his desk, iPad, Bluetooth headphones, a prescription, phone charger, a book, and a couple other knickknacks, and walked out the door and didn't return. No one's seen him since. Some of my other coworkers thought he was just sick of the long hours and decided to quit, but that just doesn't make sense why he'd leave his personal belongings and not say anything. We tried calling him that same night, but his phone would just ring until it went to voicemail, and by the next morning his phone was turned off. My boss said he got a hold of his mom and that she hasn't seen or heard anything from him, but didn't seem too concerned, as she said he had a history of living a somewhat nomadic lifestyle in his past. She thinks he may have relapsed and owed someone money or just ran off with some girl. Apparently they aren't very close and don't have the best relationship. I know he had a history of drug abuse, but from everything I've gathered in the 2 years that I've worked with him, he cleaned his life up after an arrest in 2014 or 2015 for drug possession and has been clean ever since. He always acted normal around me and seemed to be living a productive life. On the subject of the pictures, a couple days ago after work, I received a group text message that was sent to me, 2 of my other coworkers, and 6 other numbers I don't recognize. It was from him and contained the 3 pictures that I linked. No text. I tried calling and it rang once, then went to voicemail. When I called again, it went straight to voicemail. This whole thing has me feeling very uneasy and I don't know what to think. Does anybody here recognize the location of where these photos might have been taken? The first picture that OP links seems to be the back of a shed taken in what looks to be an alleyway. Notably in the background of the picture is a very distinctive building, which looks to be a church. The next picture is just a concrete sidewalk with an X graffitied in the corner. And the final picture is what looks to be an empty parking lot of a shopping center. Even with the large amount of attention that this post gained on the subreddit, no one was able to definitively pinpoint where these pictures were taken. Several months later, OP would return to the RBI subreddit with an update on the situation. I posted here back in July about a coworker who up and left during his shift, leaving behind several personal items and not telling anyone where he was going. The next day, me and several other people received a text message from him containing 3 blurry pics of an unknown location. I received several good recommendations on what to do, and ultimately the thread was closed by the mods. Today, when I logged onto my Reddit account, I was surprised to see a ton of messages and chat invites. Apparently, Nexpo made a video about my story, and several people are understandably curious about any updates. Shortly after the thread was closed by the mods, a police report was indeed filed. However, in mid-September, I was one of the several people that were laid off from the lab we were working at, so if there were any updates on his case after that time, I'm not aware of them. I've done several searches of his name since I left the company to see if any media outlets reported on him, but I personally haven't been able to find anything. Understandably, many people were suspect of my story, and I get that, but I assure you I've not made anything up, nor have I exaggerated details. I got some slack in the original post for not filing a police report. I realize now that even though nobody else was willing to, I should have stepped up and done it myself. At the time, my perspective was that because I don't know this guy on a personal level outside of work, it really should be up to someone closer to him to do that. But rest assured, a report was filed. I'll try to answer any questions you guys have. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like OP's coworker was ever found, and even if they were found, OP would end up deleting their account, so we would never get an update about it. Based on what his mother had to say about him, I think it's not a stretch that he would get involved with the wrong crowd and have to ditch town, but that still doesn't explain why he would leave behind all of his possessions and the pictures that were sent to OP and the other people. So maybe it was something else, like some sort of psychotic break, but we'll never know for sure. I am curious to hear what you guys think though. OP definitely didn't kill his wife. This entry refers to a post made in the legal advice subreddit around 2015. Need help talking to the police about my wife. My wife has not returned home since she went out shopping late Saturday. It's getting to the point where I should call the police to file a missing persons report. I would like to be as helpful as possible when speaking to the police, but want to avoid triggering any suspicions about me. I hear a lot of stories about husbands being falsely accused when something happens. Should I only give them information in response to specific questions? Is there anything I should not bring up? I'm planning on contacting the police tomorrow morning. I can't postpone much longer as I'm getting messages asking about her and don't want to say anything to her friends or family until I file the report first. I now realize that I should have talked to her friends and family first, but at this point, I don't want to explain why I didn't file a report yet. So a lot of immediate red flags in this post right away. First of all, his wife has been missing for over 48 hours at this point, and he really doesn't seem concerned about her well-being at all. He hasn't even filed the police report or talked to her friends and family. He seems to only really be concerned about not being a suspect himself if he tells the police, which is very backwards. If he didn't do anything to her, he has nothing to worry about. But even if that was a concern for him for whatever reason, it should be overshadowed by his concern for his actual wife who is missing. Of course, everybody in the comments notices how sketchy this guy is acting. Many people even went as far as to directly accuse OP of being responsible for his wife's disappearance. But he eventually clears up all of these accusations. You see, she had just decided to leave town for a while, and she even left him a handwritten note on the kitchen counter saying just that. For some reason, in 2015, she decided to leave a handwritten note instead of just texting him, and the note was left on the kitchen counter for over 2 days, and OP just never saw it. Yeah, obviously none of this guy's story makes any sense at all. It doesn't add up. Let me know what you guys think he did to his wife, because he definitely did it. U/saiprol. Saiprol made a post in the now deleted Reddit community r/corn beef approved. The post itself is pretty difficult to find now, but you can find the archived pictures. Basically, Saiprol had a problem. She had just bought a new motorcycle helmet, but the helmet didn't fit her. Instead of deciding to, I don't know, actually buy a helmet that fits, she decides the best course of action is to perform buccal fat removal on herself. Of course, this was extremely painful, and she describes the sensation as pulling a tooth out, but in your cheek. She removes the fat pads in both of her cheeks, and she doesn't want to be wasteful, so she decides to eat them. Clearly, she is insane. I have no idea what could possibly possess someone to think that this is the best course of action, instead of just buying a new helmet. And as much as I'd like to believe that this story is fake, and that people like this don't actually exist out in the world, all of the pictures point to the contrary, and she likely permanently messed her face up. Pervert nephew. This is the disturbing Reddit post Iceberg, not the gross weird shit Iceberg, so I really don't want to talk about this one. OP's 10-year-old nephew was getting way too touchy with his 5 and 3-year-old daughters, and he doesn't want to say anything because he doesn't want to make his brother-in-law uncomfortable about it. What a loser. Obviously, everyone in the comments tells OP to man the fuck up and protect his daughters, and we can only hope that he was actually receptive to this advice. It seems like he was in the comments, but we'll never know. Houston Horror Hotel. This entry refers to a very creepy hotel room in the Zaza Hotel in Houston. Zaza Insider's question: what's up with room 322? Stay here frequently when on business. Hotel was booked solid, and my colleague managed to score a room unplanned. We all had normal Zaza style rooms, and he ended up in this goth dungeon closet. Seriously, the room had a chain holding the bed to a wall, pictures of skulls, and a creepy portrait of an old man. Room was about 1/3 of the normal size, with the furniture blocking part of the TV, bed, and window. We asked about it at the front desk, and the clerk looked it up and said, "That room isn't supposed to be rented," and immediately moved him. Anyone know what's up with this room? Looking at the pictures, this room looks like it was built for Dracula. I have no idea why this room would be in a hotel, but the common theory seems to be it's just some sort of weird marketing ploy. r/hankstank. So this is a very deep rabbit hole that I wouldn't be able to do justice in this video. Maybe I'll do a deep dive into that topic alone in another video someday. Eudoxia Mysteries has a really good video on it if you want to hear more about it, but I'll briefly summarize it here. On the surface level, r/hankstank was just an edgy meme subreddit. But many of the active users would oftenly speak in code, referring to things like 113 or 53 or 42. And some of these users would even admit to having illegal content on their phones, with one user specifically even asking how much trouble he can get into because the police got a hold of his phone, and if he went to prison for S crimes, is he going to be held separately or be thrown in with everyone else? And it seems like many of these users were actually trading this type of content with each other, as well as being responsible for or involved with a whole lot of other very bad things. The subreddit has since been taken down, and the FBI even launched an investigation into the subreddit and some of the users involved with it. Redditor gets revenge on his son. This entry refers to a post made in r/confessions around 2019. I stood by and allowed my wife to almost kill our son. I was happy she did it. Okay, fair warning, this one is long as hell. Apologies for that, but this is very hard for me, and I have been carrying it for a lot of years. On the advice of my therapist, I've written it all out to try to work out my feelings on it. He didn't advise me to submit it to Reddit, of course. But I've struggled with this for a long time, and I need to hear other people's opinion on it. I still really have no idea how I feel about it, even after all these years, but I will submit for judgment by the masses. I know I did wrong on some things, probably a lot of things. I tried to do the best that I could. My son was very troubled, very troubled. If you have seen the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin, it will really help to understand what I'm talking about. Because I swear to God, when I watched that film, I thought I was watching a documentary of my life. I felt the writer must have had cameras hidden in my damn house. That's how accurate it was. The only difference is that in the movie, the boy appears normal to his father and only reveals his true nature to his mother. With my son, he didn't have that mask. His insane behavior was the same with everyone. From the day he was born, my son just came out wrong. He was planned. My wife and I tried to get pregnant, and we were ecstatic when he was born. He was wanted and loved. We showered affection on him and really tried to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he was miserable. He cried for 13 months straight. I'm not exaggerating, 13 months without a break. He cried until he had no voice left and kept crying. You could see his little face scrunched up and no sound coming out. Totally hoarse. There were times he would literally be crying in his sleep. I've never seen or heard of any other kid able to do that. We brought him to the doctors, specialists tried changing his diet, held him, rocked him, toys, swaddling, music, mobiles, everything we could think of. Nothing worked. 13 months of grating, grinding, no sleep hell. Once he got over the crying stage, we thought we were out of the woods, but it quickly became clear that for some unknown reason, he was just angry at being alive. I never saw that kid have a genuine, joyous smile once in the time I knew him. I saw him grin a vicious, horrible grin many times, taking a perverse pleasure from causing pain or suffering or breaking a rule, but a smile from real pleasure at something nice? No, never. Not once. He had no interest in anything positive. He was fueled by hate, and everything he did was bent toward that. As soon as he could walk, his mission in life was to destroy things. He would break or try to break anything that came in his range, smash it, chew it, throw it in the toilet, whatever he could. After a while, he figured out how to get his diaper off and took great pleasure in shitting and pissing anywhere he could. After a while, he figured out he could hide it, and started pissing and shitting in places we wouldn't find right away, grinding it into carpets, making it even more of a problem to clean and making the house stink. When he got older, ages 9 to 15, he would piss and shit in our bed, until we got a lock on the door and he wasn't able to get in anymore. Then he'd just take a dump in the hallway in front of our room. That biological warfare started around 2.5 years old, and he never grew out of it. I'll try to speed it up as I could literally go on for days about this stuff, but as he grew older, he became more and more unmanageable. He would bite, kick, scream, scratch, and spit at anyone trying to do anything with him. He was kicked out of school twice before he was 9, then they let him back in, and then kicked him out for good. He had to change schools. The next one put him in a special class that kept him away from the other students. We had to install a door and lock on the kitchen because he would steal knives and use them to gouge the walls and furniture or chase people with them. When he was 10, he stabbed me pretty good in the hip and ass. I still have scars. As he grew older, he grew darker. He moved into setting things on fire and torturing local animals. There was a stray dog that hung out around the park near our house. My son blinded it in one eye with a barbecue fork. He would dip cats' tails in gasoline and light them on fire. He became a violent, stinking, vicious beast that lived in our house. We couldn't do anything with him. I will take this opportunity to preempt the tsunami of messages. Yes, we had the kid in fucking therapy. He saw a psychiatrist twice a week and had God knows how many different medications prescribed to him over the years. Nothing worked. Therapy didn't work, meds didn't work, nothing fucking worked. It was like a poison cloud of hate and fury, lashing out at anything in his reach. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again. I can't tell you how different our reaction was. Instead of joy, we felt horror. This pregnancy had not been planned, and we really were at a loss over what to do. My son had been such an unending nightmare for 16 years, we couldn't take the idea of starting again from the beginning. We talked a lot about terminating, but A, access to abortion was not as easy in those days as it is now, and B, my wife was very against it. We talked about many options. In the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby, and if it turned out evil, we would put it up for adoption. We knew we just couldn't do it again with another child like our son. We had a daughter. She was normal. Suddenly we saw what our lives should have been like this whole time. How things would have been different if our son had just not been himself. She laughed at things. She breastfed without biting. She didn't have teeth yet anyway, but you could tell she was just trying to eat, not tear her mom's breast off. After 4 months, she was sleeping through the night. She was happy. She was normal. I can't describe the relief and happiness that we both felt. I don't have words for it. This is where I believe I may have started really pulling back from my son. Up until that time, whatever mistakes I made, I had always tried to do the best for my son. I am convinced of that. I tried to help him and love him and care for him. I really tried. But when my daughter was born, my wife and I both instinctively just turned toward her. She became our focus, not from malice, but just because she was so much easier. She was so happy and sweet. Every moment we were with her was like magic. I understand this was wrong, but we honestly couldn't help it. I don't have a better explanation than that. My son hadn't given a shit about my wife being pregnant. I honestly don't know if he really understood it. But when we brought our daughter home, he started acting out even more. I didn't think it was possible, but he took it up another notch. At this time, he was 17 and we were having blowout screaming matches daily. Usually after we fought, he would storm out of the house and disappear for hours at a time, or come back the next morning. It was a relief. I started to actually look forward to our fights because it would get him away from us for a while. After the birth of our daughter, my relationship with my son was almost entirely gone. Our only real interactions were screaming at each other. My wife was even worse with him. She just had nothing left. By that time, if our son even came into the same room as her, she would just stop whatever she was doing and start screaming, "Get the fuck away from me. Get away. Get the fuck out." Until he left. He started spending more and more time out of the house, which was a blessing for us. I have no idea what he got up to out in the world, but we were just happy it wasn't being inflicted on us. As a consequence of our son's behavior, we had invested heavily in locks around our house. All of the cheap, thin interior doors in our home had been replaced with thick, dense wood doors that couldn't be kicked through, equipped with keyed locks that my wife and I carried keys to. I know it sounds extreme, but locks and heavy doors were the best way we had found to create safe spaces from him. And again, before I am inundated with messages, I was not locking my son in rooms like a prisoner. He had free reign of the house and could come and go as he pleased. My wife and I would lock ourselves in rooms to protect ourselves from him. If anything, we were the prisoners in our own home. On the day in question, I had fought with my son in the morning and he had left the house in a rage. My wife and I were enjoying some peace and quiet in the kitchen while our daughter napped in the bedroom, and then my daughter began crying. Any parent who has young children can tell you, you get used to your child's cries and you can tell after a while what they need. They cry differently if they are hungry or need changing, or are just restless and want to be held. Babies can communicate pretty well before they can speak. This cry was none of those things. This cry was terror. The second we heard it, my wife and I were both up out of our chairs and running to the room. The door was locked, of course, and it took a few seconds to get the right key and get it open. My son was in the room. We lived in a bungalow, and the bastard had climbed into the window to get to her. He was standing over her crib with a steak knife in his hand. I have no idea where he got it. It wasn't one of ours. We controlled our knives very carefully and always kept them in locked drawers. I think he may have stolen it from one of our neighbors' houses. He had broken her skin twice already, once in the belly area and once in her arm. I could see blood running down. When I entered the room, he was dragging the back of the knife down her face, not cutting, almost tickling her with it, teasing her while she screamed. He looked up at us and smiled. Before I knew what I was doing, I was already moving, running to put myself between them. I didn't think about it, I just moved instinctively. Even with that, my wife got there faster. It was like a movie on fast forward. She got to our son and bashed his hand away, knocking the knife across the room, and then shoved him with her whole body weight, so hard that he flew away from the crib and bounced off the wall. I picked up my daughter and held her while my wife screened us. I could see her shaking, almost convulsing. I can remember the smell of the room, the sound of my daughter's screaming and wailing. The look on my son's face as he stood there. Just nothing. Blank, dead. There was nothing in his eyes, no emotion. He looked like an alien to me. I watched my wife take a step toward him. I could have reached out and stopped her, but I didn't. She stepped forward again, very close to him. I could have stopped her again, but I didn't. She waited, looking at him for maybe 3 to 5 seconds without moving, and then she punched him in the face. Now, until this point, you may have been picturing my wife as a typical woman, small frame, dainty, delicate. This is not the case. My wife does have a small frame, but dainty and delicate she is not. Never has been since I've known her. Since her early teens, my wife has been a boxer. MMA didn't exist back then, but karate and boxing were big in those days, and my wife was a very talented amateur. She was about 130 pounds, she carried a lot of muscle, and she knew how to punch. I had 70 pounds on her back then, and I have no doubt that in a real fight between me and her, she could have and would have pounded me flat. Neither of us had ever laid a hand on our son in anger before, but something broke in her that day, and all the years of anger and pain and sorrow and frustration just came pouring out. When she hit him, his head snapped back and blood started to pour out of his nose. He hardly reacted. He just looked at her with this shocked expression, like he didn't know how to process what had just happened. She waited another second, and then she hit him again. I could have reached out and stopped her. I could have dragged her out of the room, taken her away, calmed her. I didn't. I just stood there and watched while she systematically started to pound him to a pulp. Every time he brought his hands to cover one part, she would blast him somewhere else, body, head, over and over. He started screaming, crying out, yelling for her to stop. It's the most genuine reaction I'd ever seen him have to anything in his whole life, but she wasn't stopping. I watched her ramping up, hitting harder, faster, working him like a heavy bag. He tried to swing at her and she slipped him easily. She was on autopilot, sinking down into her training. I stood there watching for a minute, then I turned my back on them and took my daughter out of the room. I brought my daughter to the kitchen and gave her a bath in the sink. I found that he had cut her a third time on the sole of her foot. All the cuts were superficial. I cleaned her up, held her until she calmed. I put polysporin and band-aids on her cuts. In our bedroom, I could hear my son screaming, calling my wife horrible names, telling her he would cut her head off and fuck her corpse. After a while, I didn't hear him say anything anymore. I didn't even hear him crying out. I assumed that he must have been knocked out, but I could still hear her beating him. That went on for a long time, long enough for my daughter to drift off to sleep in my arms. I just sat at the kitchen table waiting for her to finish. Finally, she came out and sat down across from me. Her hands were swollen and red. Her face and arms were splattered with blood. Her chest was heaving. We just stared at each other without saying anything. After a while, I asked her, "Is he dead?" She looked back at me and answered, "I fucking hope so." I nodded. That was all there was to say about that. I understood how she felt perfectly. I felt the same. I didn't know what to do, so we just sat there waiting silently. Eventually, my wife started crying and went to go take a shower. I just stayed where I was holding our daughter. After a long while, I heard moaning and sobbing coming from our room. It turned out that my son wasn't dead. I've never seen a more merciless beating laid onto anyone, before or since. He was lying on the floor, rolling around with blood leaking out of his face, lying in a pool of vomit. His nose was squashed flat out across his face, both his eyes were completely swollen shut and started to blacken already. I could see that a couple of his fingers were bent out at weird angles, and he had pissed his pants. I think he must have been missing some teeth, but I couldn't see any on the floor, and I couldn't see inside his mouth. His lips were all puffed up and swollen. From talking to my wife about it later, I know now that she had systematically beaten every part of his body, focusing heavily on his legs. She told me she kicked him in the groin repeatedly until her legs got tired, and had kept beating his body long after he had passed out. When my wife came out of the shower, I still didn't know what to do about our son. I didn't know whether to call the police or an ambulance, take him to the hospital myself. I honestly didn't have any idea what to do. After a while, I realized that I simply didn't care what happened to him anymore, and we decided to just let him live or die on his own. There was an in-law suite in the basement that we had never really used, and my wife, my daughter, and I just moved down there. We simply ceded the top floor of the house to my son and locked everything down, separated our lives entirely. There was plenty of food in the upstairs cabinets, enough for a couple weeks or more. He had a washroom and bedrooms to use. We had a washroom in the basement, a small kitchenette, and a separate entrance, so we just stopped going upstairs. We just decided that we were done with him. I figured we'd let his food run out and see what happened. Over the next week, we could hear him moving around upstairs sometimes. I think he just spent most of the time lying in bed recovering. I went to work, watching on high alert in case he attacked me in the driveway, but he never did. My wife stayed home with our daughter. She was never out of our sight. One night, we heard him going ballistic, smashing things and banging. We didn't respond. He never tried to get downstairs or get near us though. I think he was afraid that if he got near us again, my wife might finish the job on him. After 3 weeks down in the basement, we hadn't heard anything from up above us for a few days, and I ventured upstairs on the main floor of the house. The place was demolished, and there was no sign of my son. He was gone. It took months to repair the damage he had done and get the main floor back to normal again. There was food and shit smeared all over the walls and broken glass on the floor, big holes in the drywall. He had ripped the place apart. He tore up the linoleum in the corner of the kitchen and emptied an entire foam fire extinguisher into the living room. I feel thankful that he didn't burn the house down with us in it. I'm honestly not sure why he didn't. The kid wasn't shy about lighting things on fire. After that, I lived in fear every day that he would come back, that he would ambush us out of the blue and try to kill us. We moved house about 3 years later, and I finally stopped being afraid that he would show up again, as now he had no idea where we were. I finally felt safe from him. All this happened a long time ago. My son was born in the spring of 1971. My daughter was born in 88. I'm an old man now. I'll be 70 this year, and my wife passed from cancer in 2016. My daughter is 31 now. I moved in with her and her husband after my wife passed. I've got 2 granddaughters, and they are the joy of my life. I see a therapist a couple times a month to talk about all of this. I don't know where my son is. The last time I saw him was when he was lying on the floor of our bedroom, bleeding and smashed. I haven't heard from him since he left, more than 30 years ago now. I don't want to. I carry a lot of guilt from that time, a lot of conflicted emotions. I didn't beat him myself, but I allowed him to be beaten, and I thought he deserved it. I was happy it happened. I didn't try to kill him, but I would have been happy if he died. I will say that I do hope he was able to overcome his demons and go live a normal life somewhere. If he wasn't able to do that, if he stayed the way he was, then I truly do hope someone out there killed him. When I knew him, he was a rabid dog, and whichever way it went, I just hope he isn't still out there hurting anyone else. OP definitely wasn't lying when he said that that was a long one. Let me know what you guys think about it. In my opinion, it reads like a fan fiction. I don't think the story is true. It could be real though, maybe I'm just a hater. I do know that there is a mental disorder that just makes an individual extremely disagreeable in every circumstance for no reason at all. That could be what was happening here, but in my opinion, the whole story just seems so exaggerated and over the top, I don't think it's real. Roommate wanted. This entry refers to a post made on the Let's Not Meet subreddit around 2013. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out of her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they had only been dating a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like "Roommate Wanted, Females Only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most of the other places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she receives an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there's a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opens the door. At first, Amanda thinks she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant, I forget the name, was out and he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off, but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda notices one huge red flag. No furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keeping lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walk down the hallway into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Broken for sure. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave but try to be polite. As she's giving the guy her "thanks for the showing" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around the back and let you in. It's great. You have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and her brother everything. Cops were called, they took her statement, and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. The house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier, and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closet room the landlord didn't want to let her look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepily was that he had plastered ripped up pages from porno mags all over the walls in the room. The really scary part of this was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine at about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except another pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape. Amanda ended up not moving in. This one sounds crazy, but this is one that I can definitely get behind for probably being real. Like, as insane as this story may sound, stuff like this actually happens relatively often, a lot more often than you would probably think. Post-it notes. This entry refers to a post made around 2015 in the legal advice subreddit. Post-it notes left in apartment. On the 15th of April, I found a yellow post-it note in a handwriting that wasn't mine on my desk reminding me of some errands I had to do, but told literally nobody about. While odd, I chalked it up to something I did in my sleep, thinking maybe in my half-awake state, I scrawled it out so it didn't appear to be my handwriting. I threw it out though and thought little of it. On the 19th, I found another post-it note on the back of my desk chair, in the same handwriting as the previous note, telling me to make sure I saved my documents. I was freaked out, but there were no other signs of a break-in, so I set up my webcam in my house aimed at my desk and used a security cam app for it to record after detecting movement. On the 28th, I woke up to find another post-it note, this one saying, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you, but it's important we do." I immediately checked the webcam's folder on my computer and found nothing from the night before, but my computer's recycling bin had been emptied, which I am certain I did not do recently, indicating someone had noticed the webcam and deleted the files. They were just saved straight to a folder on my desktop called webcam. Today, on 1st of May, I found another post-it note, this time on the outside of my door, with nothing written on it. And there also appeared to be post-it notes on many other doors in my apartment complex, all blank in varying colors. Do I have any legal recourse here? I have no proof except for the post-its, but those are written by my pen and on my post-it notes, so conceivably I could have faked them. Would contacting the police get me into any trouble if they can't determine an outside source for this? I just want to make sure I'm not wasting anyone's time. Should I consult my landlord? Those also living in the complex? Edit. I pulled up a letter I received from my landlord back when I moved in, and the handwriting is identical. Could this count as evidence? So OP ends up concerned that his landlord had been stalking him, but what was actually happening to OP was that he was suffering from a carbon monoxide leak in his house. You see, all of the things that this stalker was doing to OP was actually doing himself, but he was in a delirious state and was forgetting all of it. Luckily, people in the comments told him about this possibility and he ended up getting it fixed before something way worse happened, because a CO2 leak can be fatal. The Glove Man. Originally, I thought this entry was referring to Dr. Gloves, which is a 4chan thing and is very disturbing. When I get around to covering a 4chan iceberg, that will definitely be on there. This actually refers to a post made in the Halifax subreddit warning young men about a guy who drives around offering rides and gets off by allowing these young men to try on very tight-fitting leather gloves. Definitely very weird and a red flag, but not really disturbing on its own, kind of boring. Someone at the window. I really wish the guy who made the iceberg was more specific with these entries, because this one is just so broad. There are a million different stories about people looking through someone's window on Reddit. I believe this entry is referring to a post made on the Let's Not Meet subreddit around 2014. If I'm being honest though, nothing about this post really stands out to me. OP sees someone looking into her window, And then she hears noises in her house and thinks someone broke in, but nothing was taken, nothing was out of place. Yeah, it's creepy, especially if it was a real story and this actually happened. It would definitely be terrifying in the moment. But I want to talk about more unique stuff. This is pretty tame, nothing really stands out. Friendly lady. This entry refers to a post made on the Let's Not Meet subreddit again, this time around 2014. Something about her was just off. Late last year, I had my 21st birthday. Along with celebrating with my friends, my boyfriend's mom wanted to take me out as well. So his mom went ahead and reserved a table at a bar in downtown for Saturday night. Saturday night comes and there's major traffic, but it's always packed in downtown on the weekends, so this is expected. His mom and I park in a toll parking lot, and we have to walk about 5 blocks to the bar where we are going to meet my boyfriend and everyone else at. So, we start walking and arrive at a crosswalk we have to wait at. There's maybe 8 other people standing at this crosswalk with us. I'm just patiently standing there minding my own business when suddenly I notice this girl standing next to me. She startled me, to be honest. 1, because of how she seemed to appear out of thin air, and 2, because of how close she was standing next to me. It almost felt as if she was trying to huddle into me. Like, you know when a little kid is shy and will try to hide behind his/her parent? Yeah, that's how she was, except she was just leaning into me and she had her shoulders hunched over. Her hair was black and long, at least down to her waist. She had on a long striped dress that went down to her ankles, a leather jacket, and sandals. She looked to be around my age, but she had dark tan skin and black eyes. Her attire was normal, but she didn't act normal. She was being really weird and kept plugging her nose, as if she was smelling something bad. And she kept skittishly looking around as if she expected something to pop out and grab her. To be honest, she was acting like a scared animal, but her demeanor was cold. Her eyes felt like they were dead and empty, and her face held no emotion. So, not liking how close she got to me, I took a few steps to the side. And guess what? She stepped towards me and got as close as she was the first time. What? I sort of thought that was weird, but gave the situation the benefit of the doubt. Plus, the crosswalk light turned green right after she came close to me, so I figured I didn't have to deal with her because we would walk our separate ways, right? Wrong. She walked across the street and the first few blocks with me, staying the same closeness she was at, no matter where I moved to. No matter how many times she almost got lost in the crowd of people, she would scurry up right next to me again, all the while plugging her nose and looking around everywhere. She made me feel weird. My boyfriend's mom at this point confronted the girl, saying, "Hey, do you need something? Are you okay or what?" To which the girl responded, "It's not safe." After she said that, she slowly lifted her head, cocked her head slightly, and looked me dead in my fucking eyes. Her voice quivered. My boyfriend's mom and I just looked at each other like, what the fuck? At this point, I just wanted to get away from this weirdo. It was bad enough she wouldn't stop invading my space and following me, but now she's saying this weird ass shit while looking at me? Nope, 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 nope. Boyfriend's mom pulls me to her and whispers to me in my ear, "Walk faster and don't look at her. I want to see if she's following us." So that's exactly what I do. And guess what? She follows us all the way to the bar. Despite my boyfriend's mom telling her to please stop getting so close to us, she responded with, "I want to stay with you guys." Despite taking unnecessary turns to see if she would turn to follow us, she would. I was freaking out internally all the way there. We finally get to the bar, whip out our IDs as quickly as we can so we can get inside and away from the freak following us. You guys, she followed us inside and sat at our table, but she sits at the farthest side of the table, and she starts to scoot herself over, but she only moves over when we look away. You turn your head and boom, she managed to hop one seat closer to you, and she's just staring the whole fucking time with this fucking blank expression on her face. My boyfriend's mom has had it at this point and gets up to tell the security guard to make the girl leave. The guard comes, tells the girl she has to go, and she actually starts to argue with him. I didn't catch the whole conversation over the loud music, but I caught the girl asking him why she had to leave and saying that she can sit anywhere she wants to. She began to get really aggressive once he told her that this table was reserved for us in our group that she was not a part of. She got all fussy and looked at me with malice before she got up and stormed out, but she didn't leave right away. She stood outside, looking in at me through the open patio at the front of the bar. She wasn't moving and seemed to care less about the hustle and bustle of the people around her. She stood there for about 15 minutes before finally leaving to God knows where. There was just this really bad and dark feeling that I got from her. She made me really nervous for some reason, and she just felt wrong. I mean, she was probably someone just cracked out on drugs, but it was super creepy, and I hope I never have to see her again. This post really doesn't sound all too crazy, but the picture that OP linked of this woman just makes it feel so much more real and spooky. Like, it really just puts into perspective how uncomfortable and creepy this would actually be. Surveillance. Again, super vague. This could literally be referring to almost anything, but I'm pretty sure it's referring to a post made on the Let's Not Meet subreddit around 2014. A true, very creepy surveillance story. So first of all, I only just discovered this subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me back in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family, and I didn't really talk about it back then as it scared the fuck out of me. But it was a while ago and is a really well-known creepy story among myself and my friends and family. But I think I may as well share it as it is admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and my sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time, 2008, which means I was 19. I remember my dad had just got Foxtel, cable TV in Australia, but only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box. And I really wanted to somehow get the cable in my room without paying $99 or whatever for a new box. So Dad one day went out and bought an AV transmitter / receiver. It was basically a two-piece bit of hardware where you could plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. My younger sister, 16 at the time, was the only other person home at the time, upstairs in her room. My room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first, I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, etc., but with no luck. Until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there and something started fuzzing in. This is where things start to feel like a horror movie. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see the picture come in clearly. As it started fuzzing in, I remembered that this whole time the cable set top box wasn't even on, and that's why it wasn't working this whole time. But then why was I getting a signal? It seemed to hit me all at once. As I realized the box was off, the picture fuzzed in and I saw a bed. I freaked the fuck out, as at first I thought it was my bed. I had recently seen Saw 2 and remembered the scene where she turns on the TV and it's a camera filming her in her apartment. That was the first thing I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was or how I was getting the signal. Obviously, it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just so confused as to who / what it was for. Eventually my parents came home and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor or someone living close by for us to be receiving the signal. We waited around until about 6 p.m. and then someone came into the room. My dad recognized it as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had to be something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either this, or it was to tape themselves having intercourse. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room, but just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup on, staring at the camera waving, and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened, but what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days, the novelty kinda wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it, but just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating. Until one day, we turned it on and realized what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During the weekdays, they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening the drawers. I called out to my mom, the only person in the house, and we started watching it. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them, doing all that creepy shit. At first we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing, he's being filmed. Will the neighbors see this somehow? But then what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down the fucking lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told my mom that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. Dad came home, and by this time the plumber had left. Much to Mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what we saw. Mom wanted to stay completely out of it and was terrified, understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found that was holding the camera was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently and there were lots of water restrictions. Still is now, I think. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it into the wall to watch the bed. Immediately they called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends, showing them pictures, but truthfully my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden all over our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door and asked what happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would, at nights, come to our street and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watch them on his laptop. When Mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was, besides the obvious of a creepy dude sitting in his car watching people through a hidden camera, was because on multiple nights when I had driven home late from my girlfriend's or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon. Don't know if that's what they're called outside of Australia, but it's like a big hatchback car, always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never there during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just this creepy fucking plumber sitting back in there on a laptop, watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyways, that's my story. It's all true and still creeps me out to this day, but my friends and I have a good laugh about it. Another one with picture evidence. That is crazy. I don't really have a lot to say about this one. Obviously, very spooky. Fucking weirdo, dude. Weird guy. Mario would be ashamed. Doctor Boyfriend. This entry refers to a post made in the legal advice subreddit around 2018. I think my boyfriend has been drugging me to make me forget things. He is a doctor. This is in North Texas. Hey, so I must apologize if this post is jumbled a bit. I started typing it up in Word yesterday before my date and forgot about it before finishing it today. I think my boyfriend has been secretly drugging me for a while now and is gaslighting me. I know this is going to be hard to explain, but I have been having gaps in my memory that I have been explaining away as being tired or overworked or whatever else. I was going to ask my boyfriend about it since he is a doctor, but then I started to notice that this seems to happen when I go on dates with him. I know it must be crazy, but I have woken up with dried semen on my breasts several times with no memory of the night before. I know it's him. Well, I won't get into specifics, but he likes that kind of thing more than other guys would. The first time it happened was when we were drinking and I wrote it off as too much to drink. We get drunk and have sex all the time, so it's not a big deal to me. But then there were a few times where I know we were not drinking. I decided to break up with him over it, only to suddenly find myself on a date with him a few days later. I had not yet had the conversation to break up with him, but planned on it next time I talked with him. I remember being at a restaurant, but nothing before that. My car and his car was in the same parking lot, so I was confused. I decided to play along when he asked me to come back to his place. After 3 days at his place, I remembered everything, so I was starting to trust him again. Knowing he was an ENT, I know it won't be his forte, but he is a doctor. I was going to ask him about my issues when he randomly pointed to these red bumps on my thigh and said I should be treating those sores. I had completely forgotten they were there. These little red bumps that look like needle injections that got infected. I got so freaked out that he mentioned them that I decided to leave. The next day, he came over to check on me, and I remember waking up in bed with more dried semen on my chest. Then today, he met me for lunch saying we had agreed to meet. I never agreed to meet with him and would never want to. He does this all the time, saying we agreed to do something I have no memory of. I am sick and tired of it and want him punished. This has started to affect my work life as well, as I start to get paranoid when I see a boss walk into the room after making eye contact with me. I get paranoid that they are about to fire me. My friends also state I have been acting strangely and out of character. I have even begun to lose sleep and sleepwalk when I do. Is there a way to have blood work done to see what kind of drug he is using on me? I do not want to get the police to blow me off and push me away as some crazy lady, so I want to be damn sure when I go to the police. So a lot of this doesn't really add up, right? First of all, he knows where they had agreed to meet for these dates, which wouldn't be possible unless he has some sort of tracker on her car or something. There's also the fact that while she stayed at his place, the memory loss completely stopped, which doesn't make sense because if he was the one doing it and he had easy access to her, I mean, she's literally sleeping in his house, why would it stop then? And the little infected needle injections that he said she should be treating, and those little infected needle marks that he said she should be treating, he wouldn't want to bring attention to those if he was the one doing it. You see, he was actually innocent in all of this, and what was actually happening was that OP had a bedbug infestation. Bad bedbug infestation can lead to sleep deprivation, which leads to cognitive side effects like impaired memory and concentration. And because a lack of sleep also increases your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, it can lead to PTSD-like symptoms in extreme cases, like constant stress and anxiety. When told what to look for in the comments, OP would confirm that she had the signs of a bedbug infestation, and that is what was causing all of these crazy symptoms. Who knew that bedbugs could do that? Anyways, that was tier 5 of the disturbing Reddit posts Iceberg. If you enjoyed this video, please once again like, comment, subscribe, and share. And if you enjoyed this video, tiers 1 through 4 are already covered on my page. My name is Chase. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.